It's funny, Jake. I'm supposed to like introduce everybody, and with Dave, I'm like, how do I introduce Dave? Do I tell the story about jumping naked on a bed? No, I can't tell that story. With Jake, what stories can I tell? And I once again, I can't think of any stories that I want to talk about publicly about Jake Williams, but Jake is one of my absolute best friends. One of the things about today is a lot of the people that we have here are people that I keep in close communication with. I have a deep personal and professional respect for, and Jake is one of the most experienced people I know. He is one of the most brilliant security researchers I know, and he's absolutely fantastic to have on this panel. So Jake, I'm going to hand it off to you. Please take it away.
Hey, John, thanks so much. And ditto, when it comes down to, good friends, good experience, again, I don't have a lot of public stories I could tell about you either, so we'll just hold it there. So John asked me to come and do this, and I got to tell you, like, initially my first thought was, darn, I'm already committed to SANS, as this is going on, and by dumb luck, I actually have a SANS co-teach, and so this actually allows me to get away and do this, right? So I'm super happy to be here and have a chance to talk about some scoping challenges. I wanted to keep this in the theme of not just why pen testing is important, but some of the challenges that we run into with scoping and how to address some of those, right? Because I think it's already been reported on a little bit that some of the root cause, potential root cause, is some of the events has been potentially inadequate scoping or problems with scoping, whatever. And so I wanted to kind of take a positive note on this, positive spin, and I caught some of Dave's talk there at the end, kind of talking about like, hey, how do we address in war room, and again, just like Dave's firm, Trusted Sec, had a after action. We did two at Rendition, right? When we heard about the coal fire incident, like, hey, how does this change our threat model? What do we need to think about here? And these are some of the things we talked about and lessons learned there. So who am I? All of this, right? So I used to be an NSA hacker, for those that don't know. Those folks, the good old shadow brokers folks, called me out explicitly and cool, I guess. Anyway, work with IANS, founded Rendition back in the day, and anyway, all that. Let's get into the meat of this, right? I want to talk about scoping red flags, and I suspect that most of the pen testers that are on the call here have run into some of these. And look, if you are a pen tester, great, and if you're not, just be aware these are some of the things that we're looking at and go, eek, maybe this is not what it looks like, kind of thing. And so we want to make sure that we're smart about all of that. So a few red flags on scoping, right? You're asked to attack software as a service solutions. I can't tell you how often this happens. We get this a lot, where folks say, hey, come and attack my SaaS solution, and we're like, yeah, that's not legal, right? When they claim that employee personal emails are in scope. Now, let me be clear about the SaaS solution. It may be legal, right? But we have to confirm that on a contractual basis that it is indeed legal and good. A client claims that employee personal emails are in scope. This is a danger red flag, and I'm going to dive into each one of these as we go, kind of clarify around a little of these. This is one where folks are like, hey, why don't you test our supply chain? The supplier of ours, software, hardware, whatever, test our supply chain. It's going to be cool because part of their, and the one that I love on this is the contract that they have with their supplier says that the supplier will ensure security of the product, process, whatever. And folks then look and they're like, yeah, you can test my supply chain. That gives me authorization. It totally doesn't. It just totally doesn't, right? So that one's a big problematic one there, and we like to address that as well. And then the pause comes. You ask, who owns the facility you're getting ready to go physically, the one you're asking me to go physically compromise? And when they don't know, right? When they don't know who owns the facility, like if it's not them, then odds are good if you can't answer that question. You probably also don't know what your contract states around activities like that. You're 100% sure, and they say, oh, yeah, we're 100% sure, you're good. You can physically test that, 100%. We don't own it, but you're good. All right, that usually also means for us, like, that we really haven't run down contractually, what basically where do the bounds begin and end. And then this one is just an oh no kind of moment here. We want to know if our MSP is really secure. I want you to pen test our managed service provider, the folks that are doing our IT, and they're like, they hold the keys to the kingdom, so we need to test them, and you do. That's critically important. But wow, this can hurt hard. So let's talk about Saas, right? So this is my no, that's not legal section. And I want to be clear that there are exceptions to everything around here. But I just want to throw some scoping thoughts, questions, whatever out here. Here, when the client doesn't own the system that you're asking to test, and this is true software, hardware, whatever the case. Here I'm talking specifically about Saas because, well, it's easy. But Saas here, we say, okay, well, you don't own the Saas solution, right? And basically, they're just renting access to a service. Now, I'll have clients that have told us, they're like, look, we pay for this, so we have the right to test whether or not it's secure. And that's fine. You can feel that way. But that doesn't make it the case, right? And I like to use this analogy here about Uber. Everybody's ridden an Uber. One of my challenges, by the way, in dealing with scoping, and John talks a lot about this, I've heard Dave talk about this before too, basically all the smart people I know in Infosec have learned to speak in analogies, right? So basically there's a big push to make sure that you know how to speak in an analogy and communicate in analogies so that you can take these technical topics and really help really help non-technical people understand. And so what I like to use, I like these Uber and other, like stuff. And I use my mom as an example because she's an executive and not tech smart, right? And so if my mom can understand why this is a problem, then I've succeeded in communication, right? So here I'm renting access to a service, right? And so when I'm renting access to Saas, I kind of look and I say, look, if I have the right to pen test the Saas solution just because I'm renting it, that's basically the same thing as saying I can go beat up on the integrity of my Uber to test to make sure that it's safe. I can test the seat belts and the airbags and the floorboards, and that's ridiculous. Nobody believes that. Now, that said, you have an end user license agreement with Uber, and it says that Uber will put you in a safe car, and that's a contractual arrangement, right? That they've done a safety inspection or have some guarantee of safety, et cetera. That guarantee by itself, the fact that you're renting access to that vehicle for a short period of time or any period of time, does not give you the authorization to go in and test the integrity of that vehicle or the security of that vehicle. And so same thing with Saas solutions. So we like to not only talk about the scoping problem, but also how to address it to make sure that people understand it. Because look, the reality is, and I'm going to talk about as part of the the walkthrough here, I'm going to talk about knowing when to walk away from a job. There are jobs that and again, any of the professionals that have spoken before, and I suspect the folks that speak after me are going to tell you that knowing when to walk away is important. I've talked to some folks that are like, oh, they don't know what they want, I'm out, right? But I got to tell you, we're going to discuss this a little bit more too, that, or if they ask me to do something crazy, I'm out. I find that education is just key here, right? If I can educate the client and explain to them what, basically why X, Y, or Z is a problem, that's great, because what I fear is not so much, I'm not worried about keeping the business. Forget that. There's enough business out there, right? What I'm worried about is that I pass on a job because I'm like, oh, well, that is way not cool. I don't do any education. And then they call pen test puppy mill, right? And that pen test puppy mill then picks up the job, rolls with it, and then ends up having a huge incident, right? You may know that yesterday Office 365 was down. O365 was down overnight, or a chunk of it was down overnight. The problem there was not a pen test issue explicitly, but it could have been, right? And I'm not saying it was, but again, definitely could have been an issue there. So anyway. Look, if the client insists that they can test the Saas solution, just ask for the specific contract language and then pass that to a lawyer, somebody like a Ben Wright. Ben Wright is a go-to resource for me. I, of course, have have lawyers on retainer as well. But a lot of folks like to read into language, right? They're like, well, this language over here kind of authorizes me to do that. I like to say, hey, let's put this in the worst possible light that it could be presented to a jury in. And I like to base it on that. Does that language read in its worst possible light for me, does it allow me to do this action that you think I should do? And if the answer is no, we're not doing it. Okay? What about personal email? I get asked on this one all the time. And they say, listen, I've got an employee agreement that says if they log into the device, to the service from my machines, you can go and you can touch it and you can whatever. Absolutely not a chance. Another thing I hear is not only can you go look through their personal email, if it's connected to the machine, maybe you can go and send them phishing links through their personal email, because attackers are going to do that, they say. And listen, I'm going to tell you, attackers are going to do that. You as a pen tester shouldn't without authorization. from the employee, not from the employer. Now, obviously, if the employee says, hey, here's authorization, then they know it's coming. So that creates some problems there. But we have, in the past, with the right individual employee authorization, and this has been for an executive, have gone and fished an executive, right, and to demonstrate the impact, right? Rock on. You have to consider, though, some people share personal accounts, email accounts with a spouse. They haven't consented. I will mention that if you're on a purely free email plan, and I'm not going to mention specific names here, but I'm sure you can insert free email services. That end user license agreement does not authorize the end user to authorize a third party to attack them through the service or attack the service, as it were, right? And I have, like many security professionals, I have a collection of cease and desist letters when stuff has gone, I'm not going to say wrong, but we're going to say questionable use of terms of services, right? And I'll leave out which I'm sure John's got lots of stories there that he's not going to share after I'm off the air, but awesome. And then, I like to ask, because sometimes this deflates it a little bit, what's your end goal of using personal email, right? And how is it going to demonstrate compromise of the organization under test? And what I hear from a lot of security professionals is they say, hey, listen, I want to demonstrate that the user's logging into personal email is going to bypass my mail filters, and it's not going to get detonated in my FireEye or my VMware or whatever my sandbox happens to be, cuckoo if you go free, right? And I said, okay, cool. We can achieve that goal. A lot of this, by the way, scoping problems are largely goal-oriented. What is the goal of using personal email? Okay, now that I know the goal, we can refactor this. We can achieve that goal without doing anything questionable at all, right? And so what I'll typically do here then is I'll say, okay, let me come in. I'm going to set up a free email account, right, of provider X, right? And I'm going to demonstrate that we can get malware in through that doesn't get detonated in your sandbox. Okay, I've demonstrated that now. They're like, yeah, but you haven't demonstrated the employee will click on it, right? Well, I'm like, cool. Let me demonstrate putting malware through your sandbox too, that the employee clicks, and installs. And so I've got both pieces of that now, right? We can modularize this without actually compromising an employee, without notifying, et cetera. Right? So there's a lot that plays in here. Again, for me, when I hear really bad scoping, I like to root cause this. Why is the client asking for something that is questionable or may put me in a bad position? So again, this is something to kind of keep in mind here as you're thinking about testing and why it's so important. And here's another big one, of course, test our supply chain, right? Really what they mean is evaluate security of your suppliers. And look, you can do this. You should do this. We have supply chain issues going on now, and you should do this, but not by pen testing them. There are passive is the key here. Security, you can evaluate security legally and passively. I've written on this. I've spoken on this. I've got a link here and even a framework to do it with, right? I'll tell you that when I ask folks about what do you think the outcome is going to look like, what do you anticipate the outcome here is going to look like, it sounds a lot like Jason Bourne and not like real cybersecurity, right? So it's almost like the CSI cyber effect, right? Where like 1 minute you got a guy in a lab or a gal in a lab doing forensics, and the next minute she's out on the street pistol whipping the suspect, right? Again, that's not what cybersecurity looks like. And unfortunately, folks, particularly first timers, I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes here. My first time folks that are getting this pen test for the first time here, they very often have some miscommunication or misconceptions about this, right? So you can stipulate in a contract, if there really is a security issue where passive is not good enough, you can stipulate using contractual language a requirement for a pen test by a specific provider that you choose. We do a lot of this work for a Fortune 200 company where when they engage with a supplier, we get the pen test. And who pays for it is up in the air depending on the contract language. But basically what's happening here is they say, listen, we want you. You're in our short list if this pen test is successful, or successful meaning nothing here scares us away, or there's something here and you remediate that stuff, good to go, you have the contract, right? And that's basically the way that they do this, right? And I'm down with that, obviously. It's good work for us, but it's also good for the supplier that they understand where their vulnerabilities are at as well, and it's all done in a fully legal, fully notified manner there. Right? What about facility issues, right? This is a big one here. I always look for the pause or people that are too sure when I ask words like, are you sure you can authorize a penetration test or an intrusion, a test of this physical facility? If there's a substantial pause, they probably haven't thought about the specifics of what they're asking for. They're probably hearing this question for the first time. One big one that I get a lot is, can you break into the co-location facility where we've got a rack of equipment? or a couple of servers in a rack or whatever. If you've got co-location, that should raise immediate questions. They don't own the facility, successful penetration, of the defenses, you could be putting other tenants at risk. And I promise that's what lawyers are going to argue, right? So co-location facilities, we've tested a few of them, largely through supplier-based contracts. But the big key here is, let's say that I'm going to pick a company, let's call it Acme Corp, right? If Acme Corp operates across 12 states and they have 2 colos at different locations, Acme Corp can't authorize me to go break into their colo. They probably can't based on contractual language. And I'm yet to see a contract that says, yes, you can authorize that. What I have seen is boilerplate contracts. What I have seen is contractual stipulations that stipulate around security and basically how they will get a third-party test. And in some cases, they even the customer stipulates who the third-party test will be by. But yeah, this idea of they can just randomly authorize it, big no-go, right? How about when they're 100% sure? People are like, oh, no, this one's better. This is better than the pause. They've thought about it. 100% sure to me is one that they probably haven't thought about either, right? A case study here and an example that we've run into, and I suspect some other testers have as well, is hey, are you authorized to are you authorized to go in and break into this 60-foot or 60-story high rise? And they're like, we say, hey, do you own it? And they're like, yeah, we rent half a floor there. We're on floor 49. And I'm like, okay, see, that's not the same as owning a high rise, right? I mean, now if the company, we ran into this one time before, the company we were testing actually did own the high rise and leased the rest of the building out. Rock on, cool deal, right? You can authorize whatever you want, game on, right? But look, the reality here is that we need to make sure a couple of things. First off, that the building manager or owner approves it, right? And the contract allows it, and if not, we have to supplement contractual language. And then we need to define a scope such that our activities are not going to impact other tenants. Now, I'll tell you that without getting into specifics here, there are times that we have messed with elevators to avoid bypass, depending on what's in scope. We've messed with security cameras in the past, right? And these are rare tests that this is scoped in for, but I certainly can't do that in a multi-tenant facility, right? And so, we have to adjust scope even when the client wants it, even when we have the capability to do it. I have to be very, very careful about scope in a multi-tenant environment, and this is true for both software as well as physical, right? For instance, one of the things I love to do is pretend it's my first night on the cleaning crew. When there's a contract cleaning crew, I got the badge printed. Sometimes I buy people off, take your pick, right? But if I've got to go in there, if I'm not doing any buy-offs there, if I'm just actually social engineering my way onto the cleaning crew, to maintain that cover, I've got to compromise a lot of different people's offices there, right? If the cleaning crew is provided by building maintenance, which it very often is, then what I end up having to do there is I'm now moving into multiple different companies' areas. Is that cool? No, it's not cool, right? At all. I may be in the building manager's office, right? Basically, if my client, the people we're testing, are the first people to get cleaned, game on. This is way, way, way not cool. Here's another big one. Test our MSP, our managed services provider, because they hold the keys to the kingdom. Hey, they do, right? John, Dave, I think pretty much everybody on here will tell you MSPs, by and large, right? They have some real structural problems with security. Why? Because they have one metric. They have availability as their big metric. Does it work? Make it go, right? And some of the things that they do there, because they're now sharing, system admin duties across dozens or even hundreds of sites, hundreds of customers, very often you find a lot of passwords that are reused. You find a lot of misconfigurations that get propagated across different sites. And you should test this. You absolutely should. But you have to understand that that's a separate test from your regular corporate pen test, and the MSP has to authorize it. Because if I go compromise the MSP that the managed services provider Acme Corp uses, and some other company also uses them, and now suddenly I'm taking over equipment that can be used or remote access that can be used to access 20, 30, 40 different sites, that's hugely problematic. So what do? We analyze the configuration of remote administration, replicate it in a dev environment, right? Lab environment, whatever. I want to go compromise a replica environment, and I can show that and put the onus back on the MSP to fix, all right? So there are creative solutions around this. We just have to be smart about it. Okay, great. So I've talked about a lot of legals here. Let's talk about when to walk away. You have to be ready to walk away from a job if you're not comfortable with the scope. You have to be, because legal issues can wreck your firm, right? Now, listen, I'm not going to judge here in any way, shape, or form around Coalfire. I will say that Coalfire has got a lot of advertising recently that they probably didn't intend on, publicity that they didn't intend on, and that it is, basically it's stuff that I'm sure they wish they could avoid, right? And that's all I'm going to say, right? I have no specifics around this job at all, but I'll say that, we have at Rendition, I'll tell you that there's jobs we've walked away from because we look and we're like, this is high risk. There is too much risk here that this job is going to go sideways, and the benefit of the job doesn't outweigh the risk at all. So even if you get vindicated in an issue, right, and it doesn't have to be a legal issue specifically or a criminal issue, it can just be a civil issue, you can end up with reputation damage, increased insurance premiums, right, and a lack of confidence from your testers and analysts, right? Again, we had an all-hands meeting right after the Coalfire news was announced because my testers specifically were worried, and one of the questions that came up consistently was, how will you make sure this doesn't happen to us? And B, if something like this happens to us, tell me, do you have my back? All right, show me in writing that you've got my back. All right, and it's like, no problem. We've already got that here. Flip the page, whatever your employment agreement, but cool, we've got your back. Right. That said, we're a forensics firm as well, and getting sued in forensics is just part of the game, right? So we've already got all that language, insurance, et cetera, and of course, any pen testing firm, competent one, has insurance as well. Look, Infosec practitioners are masters of risk management. For some reason, when there's money on our side coming in, we lose all ability to perform good risk evaluations. I always try to say, look, find a disinterested third party. And John, I suspect, is going to back this up where, I certainly won't share anything, about John specifically, but I will say that I have called John on more than a couple of occasions and said, hey, brother, got 5 minutes? Can you run through this with me? Does this sound sane? Right? Basically, he's a disinterested third party. It doesn't make any difference to him whether or not I get this job. Basically, he's able to go through and say, 90%, but I'd shore up over here kind of thing. And get that circle of friends that you can do that with, competent friends, of course, right? Because, if somebody says that's bat poop crazy or bad excrement crazy, rock on. Look, pad out your operating account and sales funnel. I know this sounds like, business stuff, but it can help you walk away, right? It is much easier to walk away from a bad job or a suboptimal, risky, whatever you want to call it, job, when you know the payroll is covered, 6 months down the road, right? Not tomorrow, not next week, 6 months down the road. On the other hand, you're wondering how you're going to make payroll next month, right? Or next week even. Some folks will take some really bad jobs that they know better, right, but or the sales funnel doesn't really show anything coming in, and you're starting to count down how much runway do you have. To the extent possible, right? You want to avoid that, right? And so anyway, Deviant gave a great talk at Wild West Hackfest. I think he's coming up here in a little bit. But one of the things he talked about was business lines of credit, having those open. He kind of talked a little bit about, how to start a business in InfoSec in general. And look, if you've got all that stuff in place, right, you have to worry a lot less about a particular job, and you have the ability to walk away a lot easier. So let's talk about adjusting scope, because when we get a pen test customer that has done a first, or basically they're calling us because they've got the security bug, they know they need a pen test, and they've never done it before. And not only have they not done it at that company, like they're brand new to the idea in general, right? They usually have a very unrealistic scope, and we have to spend a lot of time nailing down that scope. I'm going to tell you that unfortunately, my experience also says these are the most price-sensitive buyers. And what that means is then that I have to spend more time in engagement management as well as the sales process to get them into a scope that makes sense for all of us at a very minimum. They're going to pay me a very minimum cost, unfortunately, right? So what ends up happening here is that a lot of firms, because they've got that whole walk away mark, right? Like we're going to spend X, Y, or Z amount of time on this. And then if the sale's not closed, right, we're going to call it a loss. They basically then will have folks come back in and take those jobs that don't do good scope, right? So a lot of the organizations end up, without a good scoping process. They'll get these. Bottom line, I'm just going to say, man, if you're in, if you're in this field, take the time to educate your clients. I consider it a public service. Yes, I'm losing money here in some cases because folks won't, maybe we do a lot of education with them trying to get that scope nailed down, and we still don't get the job. Right? I'm okay with that, right? Some other folks are like, yeah, but if I push back too much on the scope, they're going to go with somebody that doesn't. I'm like, it's still your responsibility as a community leader, right, to walk them through why that scope is bad. Why is that scope suboptimal? educate them, right? Because if some pen test puppy mill, right, comes in behind you and basically beats you out for that job because they bid substantially less and say 100% of the scope is good, right? You're creating problems for the client and that pen test puppy mill, right? And look, you may say not my problem, but look, as community leaders, it's all of our problems. Anyway, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, one of the ways that we avoid, or one of the ways that we combat this at Rendition, we have an active recognition of sunk cost bias, right? It's important to articulate up front when you're going to bail on a prospective job. Know what you're willing to do in the engagement. Know what you're not willing to do. Define those, right? Write those down, by the way, right? How much are you going to bid? What's the lowest price you'll accept for a given piece of scope? Be clear about that, right? You don't have to communicate all that to the client initially, but be clear with your, with your peers, with the other folks in your organization. Be ready, have those, because otherwise you slippery slope your way into some really bad jobs. And I'll tell you that we abandoned this one time earlier this year. While it didn't have any impacts with any legal impacts or anything, we identified early on, we're like, yep, would you have taken this job now? No, but we've got so much time in the bid and we've worked so much on this and, got that client rapport built. What the heck, let's do it anyway. And it went every bit predictably poor as, outcome wise as we expected it based on, again, doing that whole recap there. And it's, again, it was, it wasn't good for us. It wasn't good for them. And really it's one that we eventually should have walked away from. I'll just tell you, sunk cost bias here, it's a heck of a drug, and you have to actively seek to avoid it. Stick to the scope. Every contract at Rendition includes language that changing the scope requires a PCR, project change request. These are always done in writing, and this unnerves some of my clients. I will tell you that one thing that I'm taking away from this incident that sparked Awareness Con is that I'm able to point back to this, right? And I've done this twice now since since this has been an issue, where they say, well, can't we just do, we're good, there's no cost change, we're set, we don't need to do this in writing. And I say, oh, but you probably saw the whole thing with coal fire, right? And they're like, either yes or no, and if no, then I basically walk them through that, and I say, we should totally do this in writing to make sure that if something does go south, right, we've got everything communicated. Nothing was purely verbal, right? And if we do on the phone, right, or vocally, the engagement manager follows up, usually immediately, right? But get off the phone, they follow up with an email detailing the summary of the change requested, impacts the delivery timeline, any additional costs, any supplemental information or access required from the customer. Now there's a paper trail. And in some cases, the PCR is literally as easy as them replying and say, acknowledged, we're good with all that, right? Because there's a question at the end that says, hey, can you acknowledge and say that you're good with this? If there's no price change, we don't need a contract set. And look, by all means, you should always probably run this all the way back through lawyers. But our lawyers have told us generally that a written, basically a written communication around this, that we are changing the scope from an authorized signatory is okay, right? Here's the big thing, though. Again, it absolutely protects your testers when you require and stick to a written change request, because when they know that the scope has to be changed through engagement management, that is usually not the guy or gal on the ground. And this helps my testers not get stuck between a rock and the hard place, right? Because if the analyst on the ground lacks the authority of the tester to approve a scope change, right, they can't be sandwiched between the customer and the customer requirements. Basically, it's the corporate policy is I can't authorize a scope change. Just kick it to the engagement manager. They'll engage it immediately. They'll fix it immediately, and we're set. But I personally don't have the empowerment to do that. And that helps keep everybody legal there, right? And legal and protected. And look, at the end of the day, for me, right, I have analysts there. And look, there are some that, obviously all my folks are top notch, but there's some that I look at and I'm like, am I willing to let this guy or this gal basically control the fate of my company? And the answer is, in some cases, yeah. And in other cases, no, I trust you to go to a test, but I'm not going to let you get into the legal stuff because you just lack that experience in it, right? And so anyway, look, Deviant brought up another great idea here at Wild West Hackfest, where he talked about going through the border. He's got stickers on his employee laptops say, employee cannot consent to a search of this device. Completely de-escalates the situation between, a CBP official saying, no, you're going to unlock it. Literally, the employee says, hey, I can't consent to this. It's not my device. It even says so, like, right on the device, right? I like this. And this is the same kind of thing with the all changes go through the engagement manager. This is the physical equivalent of that, if you will. So I'm going to wrap up here, and then I'll open it up to questions, both in and out of the room here, I guess. But watch out for red flags when you scope your assessments. This is big for us, right? We find that we do after-action reviews a lot, and I'll say that when we run into an issue, in almost every case there are red flags, right? And so, again, watch out for those when you scope the assessments. We've got a pretty good list of those. I've shared most of mine with you here. Again, these are all red flags you should watch out for. And then again, me to you, please, folks, if you're a leader in the community, by all means, please educate around this. It's absolutely critical, right? Separately, if you're not a leader in the community, if you're a customer and you're seeing some of these and somebody, from on high is telling you got to get this tested and it's got to include in the scope and the whole, man, you can then help educate back up, to management and back up to your executives and other constituents like, hey, this is probably not okay, right? Define your boundaries. That helps avoid sunk cost bias. That's a big one. And then always change scope in writing. Even when you feel like you don't need to, right? Always change it. Be consistent, 100% consistent. Because if you stick to that policy, another big thing that's going to play out here is that later, if there's a he said, she said, but like folks, you can go literally and grab people again and again and again. Or like, no, they never do verbal policy. They never do verbal scope changes. It's always in writing, and it's always been in writing. And it's all, again, that consistency is going to save you down the road, right? So I'm big fan of having that consistency there. So that's all I've got here. I'll go ahead and open it up to questions. Again, like I said, in or out of the room, whatever. But John, thank you so much for having me, man. It's been great.
Thank you so much for coming. We're going to forego questions because we have a panel discussion coming up. We've got to set the room real quick. So you're free to go. But a round of applause for Jake, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And we'll talk to you later.
Peace out, brother.